AI have developed massively since the introduction of Escape from Tarkov's PVE mode, and with that being said, there are also some developments that we found out about in 1.0's version release, at least from playtesters and from what I've seen of other people who have played 1.0. Now, I am not one of them, but at the exact same time, we can learn a little bit about what the future of AI in Tarkov is going to be, as well as let's cover some of the old things, what happened with PvE AI, and also what the new things are, and then what the future things are. Without a doubt, the introduction of Tarkov PvE mode has definitely improved the overall AI playability within Escape from Tarkov as a whole, but we didn't always start in that way, and there are definitely some future updates that are going to make Tarkov's PvE AI even better, and why if you find that the current AI systems within the game might be a little bit too easy, or you want more of a challenge, there's also some future updates that will probably be coming with 1.0. Now in 2024, we saw the release of Tarkov PvE's game mode, with basically a very limited amount of AI adjustments that were specifically for PvE, and in general just AI within Tarkov. This is because it was basically a copy-paste of what we already had, with minimal changes to really differentiate it from anything that we'd seen before. But that wasn't always the case, and the first thing that I noticed when I jumped into the game and when I was going through and trying to take out certain AI throughout the game is it felt very, very predictable. After a minimal amount of time of playing, you found that AI were basically either sitting in one place after they spawned, you know, being in the high value loot locations, they would typically only spawn there, and they would be basically there for the entirety of the game, making it very difficult to actually find out where they are and to be able to deal with them. They also spawned in locations where they were bugged. They didn't move from a house, for example. You could go upstairs on Lighthouse into a building and find 5 AI sat in one little tiny room, and they'd all laser you as soon as you went up into that room. There was no audio calls from them, and they were generally very bog standard, meaningless, and didn't really feel too engaging when you did actually fight them. But that obviously changed as time went on, and we've had a series of changes to the AI. And obviously AI have been very, very janky and are still quite janky within the current game, but they're definitely playable. They aren't terrible, and we've seen way worse pathing from AI bots and whatever within a wide variety of games. Tarkov is by no means anywhere close to the worst AI I've ever seen in my entire life, but it is definitely there to be improved, and I'm sure that BSG are going to improve it further over time, and with things like mods that we've already seen where AI can definitely get better, yeah, I'm sure over time we are going to see some of those changes creeping in and making the AI feel a little bit more engaging and more player-like and more immersive when we jump into our raids. One of the first big updates that we did see came in 0.14, where we had AI behavior tuning. And this was basically their initial attempt to try and balance the AI for PvE with things like reducing the bot X-ray vision and the unfair detection through objects. So for example, you're sat behind a object, the AI would still just laser beam you through it even though they couldn't necessarily see you through the object. Sounds pretty bad. Yes, it was pretty bad, and luckily they made a quick change to actually get rid of that because yeah, no one likes to be laser beamed headshot through a metal plate or something like that. And yeah, that was a rather annoying time for anyone playing during that time. But they also then balanced the actual AI reaction time, where we saw especially the changes to the raiders and the rogues, where they did actually reduce how long that they would react because it was almost instant. If you ever remember, if you were playing during the time period, if you were, for example, fighting the rogues and you managed to hit one of them or deal damage to one of them, or you finished one of them off, you'd see that the entire base would suddenly turn on a swivel and they'd insta-laser you from wherever it was. and that seemed not very realistic. It would be an instant laser straight from one area. However, now with the changes, they actually changed how they actually engage you, and so rather than them just suddenly doing a 180-degree swivel firing directly exactly at you, they rebalance them, and so they don't feel as crazy, shall we say. They also improved the actual scavs that you found as well, because scavs weren't the best. They often actually hit you quite consistently at the beginning of PvE, and they generally were very, very annoying to play against, because at the end of the day, they were just the standard scavs that you found, except there were more density of scavs and AI in general when you're playing on the PvE mode. There was just generally more of them to make the raids feel more packed and more lifelike, rather than like a dead raid where maybe there's only a few packs of actual scavs or whatever throughout the entire map. They also changed how grenades work, because this was the time of instant nades lobbing through windows over the top of factory wall, hitting directly underneath your feet and blowing you up. Yeah, that was a time which I absolutely despised. No one, and I mean no one, likes to be naded by an AI. Even now, they're pretty crazy, but it left you zero time. When the grenade sound, you heard it, it landed on the floor, it was already gone. It was blowing up at your feet, and there were many raids where, you know, you're running through in the middle of nowhere and a laser-like grenade would just hit directly underneath you, take you out, and you'd be like, well, there was absolutely nothing I could have done there. They had like god-nade-like accuracy, even over the top of containers, behind walls. They just somehow managed to drop a grenade directly underneath you. It was the bane of your existence when it came to their behavior. But with that changed, obviously luckily we don't have that now. It definitely feels a lot better. No one wants to be naded by an AI. It really does not feel engaging. And whilst it still happens, and they do have good accuracy on their nades, usually it's when you sit in one place for a little bit too long after engaging an AI in the first place. It isn't like they instantly swap to a grenade, throw it at you, and in the past you would have a full squad throwing nades at you, which, yeah, not fun at all. But that all changed. And then came along 0.15. This is patch 0.15, where they had better sound detection logic. So through walls, whether they're on a different floor to you in buildings, where they'd somehow, you know, be able to hear you everywhere. That is what it was like prior to the patch. And since doing that, it basically reduced how much this was the case, where, you know, you had to be on the same sort of floor. It stop those insta lasers where, you know, you'd be just walking and suddenly everyone knows exactly where you are. They would come sprinting and charging towards you, and it would feel like horde mode was activated from the very beginning as soon as you heard someone. We also had the changes to where essentially if you were in combat with, for example, an AI, that AI would then spread the word to the nearest AI within a radius of that AI, and then that AI would then spread the word in the radius of that one. And so essentially it chained off all of the AI in the area, whereby they'd all eventually know exactly where you are and would chase you down. Things like interchange were not fun, and all of the AI would run directly at you, sprinting towards you, and just, it would be like horde mode. There would be zero time to loot a body because you are constantly having to deal with either PMCs, bosses, or the actual scavs themselves just harassing you throughout the entirety of the raid with no breaks, not even time to pack your mags. That wasn't particularly fun, so they changed it, luckily. And so we no longer have that one. They also actually added the ability for scavs and AI to search things. This was one of the biggest patches for just general loot being taken and actually searching AI within Tarkov to find actual loot within their inventories. That should have been in the game from the very beginning, but it wasn't, and so this one definitely felt like you actually got rewarded for taking out AI, especially in the end game, and that still continues to this day. If you take out an AI near the end of the raid, you are going to find a lot more loot within them, and that definitely got improved. This was not the only patch where that was the case, but this was the building blocks of how the current system within the game is, where they do actually loot things. But we also then saw solo scav grouping up more frequently, so there were more of them going into a group, so maybe there'd be 2 or 3, so rather than seeing just one scav every single time, you would now see 2 or 3, and they'd come in packs, which felt a little bit more tense and engaging than just, oh, there's one scav, and then 1 minute later or 2 minutes later, oh, there's one more scav. You know, it felt like there was a bit more urgency to the game. Moving then on, there was also a search behavior improvement, whereby if you got unspotted by a AI, whatever that was, is that they don't just kind of know exactly where you are and will still know where you are through the entire building. They will actually go, actually I've lost sight with that person. I have no idea where they are, so I'm going to fan out, I'm going to try and flank, I'm going to push using like the corners of buildings and stuff like that, and go that way. So that definitely felt a little bit more lifelike, rather than just, okay, now the AI knows where I am. If I re-peek the corner, I'm insta getting headshot every single time, because they basically have target lock on you. It felt like they were cheating in some situations, and it meant that you couldn't just play just to even peek for information. It was just insta laser beamed in the head, so you couldn't re-peek. That was not particularly fun, and so that was also changed in 0.15. And then they also had an issue whereby you could run past certain AI as a scav, for example. If you played on a scav, you could run past PMC AI within your raids if you were playing on your scav. And you run past them and they do absolutely nothing. And so you could essentially just go up to a PMC about literally half a meter away from him, aim at his head, take him out, and the AI wouldn't even react. That didn't feel very balanced. So yeah, they definitely made some changes to those, and now AI do generally engage scavs, and I think it was because back in the day we had basically a reduced amount of AI interaction with one another. They basically did not interact. If a scav met a PMC, they would just walk directly past each other. There was like no engagement, and now when you jump into your raid, you actually hear fighting, and often that is between either PMCs and scavs, PMC groups and another PMC group, and they'll actually fight each other, which, wow, surprise surprise, should probably happen in a game where it's a you versus everything in the lobby. Now it's more like you versus everything in the lobby, but also that everything in the lobby does somewhat interact with one another. It's not perfect. There are instances where you'll find scavs and PMCs not interacting, but that's more nuanced than it is the rule. Whereas before it was the rule. They basically never interacted with each other, and you could find a group of 5 PMCs sat with a group of 3 scavs, and as soon as you engage either one, they all come charging towards you only. This update, patch 0.15, definitely helped with that one. Then came along patch 0.16. Now patch 0.16 came with a huge amount of changes to fine-tune the AI's reaction times, to fine-tune how they work as a faction. So if they're rogues, raiders, if they're a scav, if they're a PMC, if they're a boss. And it was adjustments to how they would interact with you. For example, a scav will now run for cover when you do take a shot at it, or a PMC will also run to cover, or it will now flank you, and it will use ways in which, if a PMC squad is engaged, that maybe one of them tries to flank on the right, the other one tries to flank on the left, and one of them will come straight down the middle, and so it gives you a bit more of that realistic squad feel. And so that definitely felt nice, and it was, whilst it isn't perfect, and there are definitely some weird interactions where even in the current game, as we've got it right now. If you take a shot at a PMC that is trying to flank, they will do a 90-degree turn and suddenly run weirdly off to a different area like they're taking cover themselves, and then they will just turn again 90 degrees and aim directly at you and start shooting you at the exact same time. It isn't perfect, and that is definitely something that needs to be worked upon. It feels like you can interrupt the flanking or interrupt the original intended thing that the PMCs or the scavs or whatever they're going to be doing. When you take a shot at them, for example, it's like instantly they suddenly move to one side, or they do like some weird jumpy animation where it janks over to one side, and it definitely feels a little bit strange and not really as immersive as you probably would hope. So that is definitely one of the negatives of how it currently works within the game, but this update definitely added extra logic and felt like we saw a huge amount of reduction in things like one-tap headshots, which would happen to you quite frequently by AI that, you know, we all knew about it, where if you aim at an AI from a while away and then you know, before you even shot, they'd suddenly know. They had like a sixth sense. If you're aiming at a PMC and he's looking directly away from you, and then you aimed at him and he was within the distance where he could engage you if he saw you, they would just instant turn around and then they'd fire at you, like as if they knew that you were just about to fire on them. As soon as you hovered your scope over them, they'd instant turn around. And I was like, this doesn't quite feel right. And so they did definitely change some of those things. It still kind of happens in the game, but it definitely feels not the same. It feels much, much better. And they do now genuinely play more like players would. Now, they're not as generally unpredictable as players, because they are an AI at the end of the day, and they're only programmed to do whatever their programmed things are. And you're never going to be able to see exactly what players will be from the AI in the game, at least anytime soon. Let's face it. But at the same time, we also then saw the instant snap aim. They have now essentially bloom to their accuracy at the beginning. The longer they're in combat with you, the more accurate that they'll get. Before, it was just kind of like they had a baseline accuracy that they would just hit every single time. So if it was a rogue, they'd just have very good accuracy. If it was the goons, they'd have a very good accuracy straight away. So it would lead to just like instant takeouts. Whereas now they have, like, if they're in combat with you, they've seen you, and like you say between 1 second, they won't necessarily instant hit you in the core areas, and then after a second they'll start to increase their accuracy, and then eventually if you stand there for too long, they will just hit you every single time. Scavs generally have a really bad accuracy in the first place. Like, I've had instances where I literally stood in front of a shotgun scav and it did not hit me for a solid like 5 rounds, and then even when it hit me, it then took another like 3 rounds to hit me again, and I was sat there for a solid like minute waiting for the scav to actually finish me off. So yeah, not particularly the best, but yeah, it's definitely improved over time. And also, you're seeing the bots no longer just insta-rushing you. So before, what you would do is you could essentially get yourself into a doorway, you would fire at a PMC, and then that PMC would just sprint directly through the door towards you, regardless of what, like, technically you would just be pre-aiming the door, and then as soon as they come through that door, you would just insta-spray them down. It still happens, it still occurs, but to this same degree, they will take cover and they may not instantly aggro you. So they could like just stay outside of the door and they may wait for you. And so that feels more intuitive. Like, you know, when you could essentially guarantee that you're going to survive every single fight by just literally going to a doorway or some sort of funnel where essentially the AI would just sprint directly at you and you just pre-aim head level and insta one-tap them as soon as they come around the corner. Didn't feel quite right. So whilst some of these changes probably made it a little bit more tough for the general player base, it also makes it feel more like a game, more like a actual simulator of tactics, rather than just, yeah, I can just roll in and basically just farm the game. Whilst you can still do that, it didn't it didn't really suit the whole Tarkov hardcore-y shooter, extraction shooter vibe that I think that they're trying to go for. But they also had some updates to stim and med timing, because sometimes you would shoot a PMC instantly, and I mean instantly, start trying to heal themselves. You are still looking at them, shooting at them, and they would instantly swap and try and med. And it's like, I'm not quite sure that is exactly what a person would try to do, which the AI are trying to imitate. Yeah, I mean, come on. What was that? And whilst I had an incident recently where I hit a PMC or a raider down in the labs, and we hit him, and then for some reason he instantly just started to heal and just sat there crouched, healing himself up whilst I was looking directly at him and whilst he could look at me. It isn't perfect. And that's what I'm trying to say. The AI is definitely nowhere near perfect on the game, but you can see the overall development of the AI, and generally some of the core issues that we saw as a player base have genuinely been fixed and improved upon. And whilst we're not at the final destination, we've definitely seen a big journey, especially if you were to play the original AI versus what it is right now. I think you would see a tremendous, and I mean a tremendous, change in how they work, and for the better as well. It's not like they've added a load of things and it's actually just as bad but in different ways now. It definitely feels much better. Then obviously pathing was diabolical. It's still pretty bad now. Like, they are not necessarily that great at pathing towards you. Like, even the flanks that they might make don't necessarily make sense. Like, some of them would run off into the middle of the road as if they were flanking you, but all that does is, they get away from the cover that they were at, so it becomes easier because they're in the middle of an open area. I mean, it's not the greatest. You'll also see that even currently the AI will essentially, if you engage them from distance and you are too far out, so if you're like sniping, for example, and you're on top of reserve, like the dome, and you start firing at someone, they have a set routine almost, it feels. Like after a minute, they'll essentially just completely disengage, they'll forget about what happened previously. And so you'll see them return to the location where maybe you took a pot shot at them at the beginning. And so you can basically just sit there for a minute and a half. They'll come back out, you take another shot at them, then they might run off back inside a building or take cover, and then wait a minute and they come back outside. I repeatedly did this over a couple of times to see, is it just like a one-off thing? Because when I saw it the first time, yesterday when I'm recording this video, so this is in the current live game, that they just have a set logic where they'll run for cover, but they don't necessarily remember that they've taken damage after a set period of time. It's like they have a 120-second memory, and then after that they turn into a potato and decide to go straight back out, and then you take a PMC out every single time. That was on a guard for Glukar, but at the same time, is this just the general standard way of how the AI works? I'm pretty sure it is, because I've noticed this from all of the different patches. The covering mechanic, the way where they run away, they always seem to come back to the exact same spot that you took the first shot at them in the first instance. And so that definitely needs addressing at some point. I don't know if BSG already have that on their radar, but with the new Tarkov community website where you can go in and suggest changes, it will probably be one I'll actually suggest for the devs to take a look at and maybe improve upon in the future. But of course, with 1.0 just about 9 days away, I'm not sure that will do anything in those 9 days, but in the future, maybe this will be something to be addressed. Oh, and AI will actually lean now. That happened in patch 0.16 as well, where they'll literally lean around the side of a corner and you won't just see the full body. You'll only see the torso and the head. So that was an interesting change and felt a little bit more scary when you saw it for the first time, because you're like, oh damn, they actually aren't as stupid and bot-like as they were previously. So that was a nice change. Oh, and if you remember interchange at the very beginning, there was a ton of scavs. You would go into a raid and it would be like an endless horde of scavs just constantly spawning. Now what happens is as you go into areas, it triggers scavs to actually spawn. So once you've been in an area, you've taken out scavs, they don't just instantly respawn in those same places. It's not like an endless wave of scavs. Once you've kind of pinged off a little sensor almost, if that makes sense, like there's sensors in various locations on the map. As you walk through that sensor, it pings it and scavs spawn. Now, they basically spawn in one set amount, and then maybe later on in the raid, after a set period of time, maybe a couple of scavs might spawn in those zones again. But previously, it would just be that they would constantly spawn around where you are, and so it felt like you couldn't get enough time to loot or do anything meaningful in your raid because you're constantly under pressure from scavs. And while scavs aren't particularly the hardest thing to take out in PvE, it was just a more annoying, and that definitely made a big improvement when they added in that, where scavs now spawn in kind of like a wave, and then they don't spawn again after that wave as you move through the map. So you could sprint through a huge chain of areas and then you would spawn quite a few scavs, but now you would essentially see that, yeah, they would spawn maybe 10 scavs or something if you ran through a load of areas at once. But then after you've taken out those 10 scavs, it's not like 10 more appear like previously. So interchange and stuff like that got way more playable and way less frustrating to play with the endless like 70 kill raids that you would have on interchange, because scavs would literally just be spawning all of the time, everywhere, at all times, throughout loads of different areas. It's only the ones closest to you really that spawn scavs, whereas before it would be like huge area where every single spawn where scavs would spawn scavs. So it was endless. But now it's time to talk about the future, because I watched a video from Airwing Marine, so just name dropping here, about Tarkov 1.0, and there was a few topics that I wanted to talk about because they seemed to have added into the game, which is that we have 2 new factions that are in Tarkov at full release. Now, I have no idea exactly what these factions are going to be like, how to compare them with the AI, but Airwing actually gave some form of information regarding that, how he feels that they are, and what they kind of compare against. Now, don't quote me on anything that I'm saying, but there is the Black Division, which are like what he assumes to be almost like rogue slash raider AI, so that sort of level where they are a bit more elite. He said more like rogues, so they are relatively difficult to deal with, and they spawn in like a group. They have different logic now than the standard AI within the game, where they are more flanking. They use more tactics as opposed to just being your bog standard like group of PMCs, which would just kind of maneuver their way towards you very slowly, or guards where they would kind of rush you after you've taken out the boss or whatever. These are more tactical, more like engaging fights, and they're very difficult apparently. So they seem to be like a group of more tactical, like, I don't know, hired mercenaries, if that makes sense. And so I think that these are going to be the ones that should make that higher endgame content that people have been looking for within PvE. If you don't like dealing with the more challenging content, then it's probably not the greatest of things for you. But if you do, then it's also great. But at the same time, it gives you something to aim for. Even if you aren't particularly that well experienced within Tarkov, these are going to be the AI that you're probably going to be coming up against, that you want to learn and understand and get better to be able to fight. And I'm sure as you gear up, because this was all play tested on like the beta version of 1.0's release, so it's not the like full finished, completely polished 1.0 version. This was like their essentially test of the 1.0 version. It isn't like the beta as it currently stands right now in the game. This was the full version, but just like the initial play test, if that makes sense. And so we will probably see these enter into the game. No idea how it corresponds to the story or where you get them, because I think Erwin wanted to leave it a bit more vague, and whilst there was a bit more information he could have shared, he didn't want to spoil anything with regards to the story, which I perfectly understand, and at the end of the day it will make it even more of a surprise when we do jump in and see how these interact. There was also a RUAF faction, which he said is like kind of like raiders almost, where they spawn at various points on the map and they'll kind of patrol around, and so they'll be more like a group of raiders essentially, and they move around, they flank, they use cover, they also have a different clothing and items on them, and Erwin said that he thinks that they actually had different gear, new gear that we haven't seen before on Tarkov. So yeah, and generally the idea was that they have more believable behavior, and I think if you're after more engaging content, this should be a very, very positive change. I think these are going to be the random engagements that you get into where you meet up with these and it becomes a little bit more tough than your standard raids. Now, I have no idea if they're every raid, whether they're on every map, whether there's zones where they'll spawn almost like guards and bosses, where maybe there's a % chance that they'll spawn. I believe the RUAF faction do spawn on the map as standard, but we don't know fully, and there wasn't a huge amount of information that I could find anywhere with regards to exactly how they work, and most of it will probably be under NDA anyway, so even if you did know more, you probably aren't allowed to say a huge amount. Not to say Erwin had any filter on what he said that he could say, but also people don't want to spoil things as well for the full release, as some of it is new and novel. But from what I can see, they're going to be a more elite faction that is going to be added into the game, both the Black Division and the RUAF actual force, if that makes sense, not just the checkpoints that you can go to on some of the maps. So overall, it's looking pretty darn good for the AI as 1.0 approaches, only a few days away. So yeah, I am super, super stoked to be playing the full version of 1.0 when it does actually launch on the 15th of November. And I think AI has come a long way, and whilst there are other mods like SPT, Sane mod, or various different other mods that do have generally what people conceive to be better versions of the AI, it is good to see that there has been a significant development, and almost every major patch that comes from Tarkov's beta versions, that we've seen improvements to that AI over time. And if once again we were to go back to the initial to now, you would see a huge drastic improvement for the better, and I think that has definitely been one of the good things about BSG, where they've tested certain characteristics, certain improvements in one like big swoop on that specific area that they want to improve, and then they've done that over the time rather than just throwing a scattershot of just loads of random ass updates into every single patch and hoping that it works a bit better. But we've still got a long way to go. There are a lot of instances where AI seem to be very weird or buggy or they're janky, and so it's definitely not a finished story. But I thought I'd talk about it today, kind of maybe give you a summary if you haven't played AI within Tarkov's PvE game mode for very long, and maybe you wanted to find out a bit of history as to what changed over the patches. These are not the full like in-depth patch notes, but also some of the information as well coming in the future and what we know so far about 1.0's AI. So thought it was an interesting topic. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you would change, whether you'd add even more factions, whether you want more difficulty, whether the AI are too difficult for you, whether you'd want AI difficulty scaling with the level of your player character, so as you level up the AI gets slightly harder, or would you want us to be able to have a tick box where you can say easy, medium, hard, you know, extreme, hardcore, something like that to the AI, and they would change their kind of difficulty based on what you pick. Let me know in the comment section down below. Of course, like the video if you did, and we'll be streaming on twitch.tv using the link in the description down below pretty much every day, and especially after the launch of 1.0. basically every day for probably 12 hours a day or something ridiculous, as we try and grind out the storyline and get in depth, and I'll try and make as many good videos for you. But thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.